thank you all for coming. This is going to be fairly short unless we continue with a lot of questions. But basically what I wanted to do, because I know everyone had asked us for some type of response, and I'll give you briefly what was stated in the opinion and how it may affect the Secretary of State's office. That's from the standpoint of which I can speak. And so, you know, it's about a 25-page opinion with no dissension, and I haven't read into it very deeply, but I have read it and understand the opinion. And first off, I just want to say that as indicated in the opinion from the Supreme Court, the Secretary of State's office was not the proper defendant, was not a proper defendant in this, and the Supreme Court pointed that out also, but we just felt that it was important to remain as part of this case because we wanted to be part of the conversation that took place to let the court know the importance of our role in having elections, obviously, because we wanted to be able to give the practical procedure for having a special election. And as you read from the opinion, you found that it was very helpful and meaningful that the Secretary of State's office stayed within this petition and argument. Also, as pointed out in the brief, in our brief that we presented to the court and then to the court itself, according to current law, there would not have to be a primary election, that candidates could be nominated from a convention for governor. And that is the point that the Supreme Court made in all of that. And the entire process, including the convention, the general election, and any post-election proceedings that would need to take place, like canvassing or a recount or certification, would all have to be completed by November 15th at noon. And that is a significant time because that was the year or the date of 2010 in which Senator Tomlin became acting governor. And as the Supreme Court pointed out, he could not act as governor for more than a year. And they pointed out that it was his purpose to then be calling the election. And so when we talk about timing then, obviously here in the Secretary of State's office, I don't have the authority to call an election, and that falls on the governor to proclaim that the timing of the election, but we know that it has to be, a governor has to be in place by November 15th at noon. So that is some of the process that we talk about. I can take some questions. If there were to be a convention, do you all understand how that might work? The convention process would be that the three major parties, Republican, Democrat, and Mountain Party, would have a state convention, but they first would have a county convention of which they would elect their county delegates who would then go on to the state convention and nominate their individual from their parties. So that is part of it. That gives you, I'm sure you can talk to the executive directors of each of the parties to understand a little bit more about their particular rules for that. So it's really quite short and sweet. I'll take some questions if anybody has any questions that they might like to ask.
You mentioned, the court mentions that you've got an ideal time frame of 160 to 195 days. Is that
Yes.
from the day you would proclaim the election?
From the date that the governor would proclaim the election, and when the process, yes, that would be. And when we mentioned the 160 days to the court, that was the time frame from when the election would be proclaimed until the voters cast a ballot. But as you all know, and especially that we found out in this election, the importance of the post-election requirements that take place, because you have canvassing, and then you have an opportunity for a recount to take place, and then you have certification. So there is a time frame, and we are also, right now, we have someone researching right now to see if how long a recount might take place for a statewide election. And so that would be part of what would need to be mentioned as part of the procedures.
As a person of interest in running for the office, what are your thoughts on the legislature possibly changing the rules to allow for a primary? Are your thoughts more towards 2012? Well,
I will speak as Secretary of State right now, and as someone who vehemently follows the code and what is written and what is presented to us and crafted to the executive branch by the legislative branch. It's certainly their prerogative to make any changes, and I think that that's what the Supreme Court pointed out. According to what is in code right now, this is the process that needs to take place, that a convention can indeed happen, that it doesn't have to be a primary. Yes, sir.
Now, if they do change that, in your final report for the last election, you had said if there ever was to be another special election, that it should take, I think your recommendation was 90 days between a primary and a special.
Yes.
You feel that should be followed if they consider changing it?
Yes, if they change the code to make it a primary, yes, we'd like to have at least 90 days because it helps us just get through the process. And I think that this is so fresh in everyone's mind because we saw how important the process and the guidelines and the deadlines and regulations are for an election when we modified 23 of those to be able to put on the special election that took place August the 28th of 2010.
So kind of ballparking, what do you think is the best timeline at this point to make sure you can fulfill all your requirements for getting the election run and having time if there needs to be a recount? What do you think would be the most optimum timeline for running this?
Well, for a general election, perhaps recount. That's what we're researching right now. And we like the, is it 125 or 120 or 165 that they have in here? We like the idea of at least having, well, at least the 90 days and then the 120, and we need to take a closer look at the post-election requirements that will take place and how long a recount would take. I might want to mention too, because no one asked this, Jared, you got the closest to asking it. In current state code right now, it indicates that counties pay for this election. Now, that's certainly different from the special election that took place on August 28th.
How much do you think this election will cost taxpayers?
Which one are you talking about? You're talking about a convention?
Convention,
well, a convention the parties themselves would bear the cost of a convention, and then they would just have to deliver to us who they have nominated from their convention. And so then you take a look at how much a general election would cost, and you saw that we had a general election of about $3,080,000. So $3 to $4 million for the general election.
If you have a primary.
A primary would be $3 to $4 million also.
And that includes the cost of having to retrain poll workers.
Well, that would, I mean, that's a good question because what helped to save some money in the special primary election of August was that the legislature, and I see our judiciary chairman here, Chairman Miley, and he understands this very well because we worked hand in hand for that whole week, is that was part of the modification. In code, as it currently stands, it says that you must have poll worker training before the election. But what we were able to do in one of those 23 modifications is say that if a poll worker had been trained from the May primary, that they wouldn't necessarily have to have the training. So now you're telling me that if we have an election, well, I don't know what time we might have it, you know, they may not make that provision and may require to have training. Is that your question? Are you asking how much it was?
Just to be clear, if there is a primary and a general, then that's going to cost taxpayers about $6 to $7 million, if there's both.
Yeah, 7 to 8 million. Yeah, I would say that, just to be on the safe side. I'm really proud of the fact that the Secretary of State's office, when we received those reimbursement claims from the counties, we went through line by line and made sure that everything pertained to the special election, and we were able to cut about $30,000 from what was first asked from the counties. And we'll continue to do that. And the counties worked very well also in making sure that they streamlined the cost and had the most efficient election that we could have.
Are there any code requirements for allowing for an early voting period? Would that be calculated in there, or is that already in the figure?
Early voting for the number figure? Yeah, there's in code, it requires early voting, and it starts 20 days from the election, but it's a 15-day early voting period. And what we did, if you'll look into the special election of August of 2010, we cut that down to a 5-day period.